I don't even think they have that because the one's on the Panera, it's inside here. It's now still putting donate if you wanted to. Another one just popped up at the old Pond Road.
I'll call to order the joint meeting of the City Council and the Plan Commission. Second item we have is roll call.
All council members are present.
Thank you very much. Before we go on to item 3, Councilmember Leiber has a quick statement.
I just want to say that due to a prior work commitment, I'll have to leave at about 20 after 7.
Thank you, Mr. Leibert. Number 3, presentation and discussion of the Rock River Arise project. Mr. Ryan Garcia.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. We're here to talk to you at a very critical turning point in our Rock Renaissance area redevelopment and implementation strategy project. We call that ARISE, Rock Renaissance ARISE for short. You'll see that down sort of in the bottom because that is quite a mouthful, Rock Renaissance redevelopment area. You get it all. So we're here to talk to you tonight about this project, which many of you have been involved in either in the public forums that we've had or through the DRC. So for some of you, the first part of this will definitely be review. But for many of you, it may be the first time that you get a good look at some of the work that we've done to date. So hopefully a good and productive meeting for you all tonight. Why are you here? Why do we have you down on the floor rather than up on the dais? The first thing we want you to do is imagine. And we want you to imagine our downtown with a traxler park that is physically linked to the downtown, both for automobiles, for pedestrians, for bicyclists, and for people on the water. We want you to imagine a welcoming, signature northern gateway to our downtown that is anchored and by an accessible and active Rock River, revitalized and repurposed buildings, and an attractive North Main Street streetscape. We want you to imagine existing buildings and businesses that take full advantage of their unique location facing the Rock River, and they're accessible from both the street and from the riverfront. I want you to imagine new developments that embrace the Rock River and our outstanding downtown transportation networks, as well as acknowledge our rich history. We want you to imagine a refreshed street network that prioritizes day-to-day foot traffic and active storefronts that spill onto the sidewalk, while still safely and effectively moving vehicles through and parking vehicles on them. I want you to imagine newly developed housing that accommodates residents of all stages of life and all walks of life, and conveniently is located near shops, dining, entertainment, culture, you name it. Finally, we want you to imagine a true heart of our downtown, of our whole community, in fact, that unifies both the west and east sides of the river, is situated between 2 iconic bridges, and provides the entire community with 24/7, 365 space to engage in public life, civic life. So we want you to imagine, that's the big picture. Other than that, we have you down here to walk you through what we've done to date and where we're going with this project as we move forward. This project is a part of our comprehensive brownfields program that's really focused on those 3 targets up there. Many of you have heard me talk about this many times before. The $400,000 EPA grant that we got in 2011, which we used to identify and prioritize brownfield sites, those sites that have known or suspected environmental conditions within our downtown. $400,000 from the EPA to identify and prioritize. $200,000 of EPA dollars to do this project that we're in the middle of right now, the area-wide planning program, something that is essentially focused on finding a relatively near-term, actionable implementation and redevelopment strategy that we can act on, that we can move forward, not just another plan. And most recently, the $700,000 that we received from EPA to actually conduct some cleanup activities. So these pieces all roll together, and we're kind of in the middle stage of that to revitalize our downtown, focusing on those brownfields areas. Today's agenda is pretty simple. We'll go through sort of what we've done to date. We'll take a little bit more time to sort of let you know where we're at today after working through six meetings with the Downtown Revitalization Committee, a group of about 15 to 18 folks from all different sectors of the community. 2 sessions with the public, very well attended, over 70 people at each of those meetings, and then staff level and one-on-one individual stakeholder efforts that we've done. And then finally, we'll open it up to you. We want to field your questions and your comments and your suggestions on the project, where it's at today and where it should go from here. Today's purpose, those first two, again, I kind of just touched on, but the last two are vitally important. We want to set expectations and opportunities for the action. We want you to understand where we're coming from so you understand where we're going, and you can act with confidence when we ask you, ultimately at the end of this year, to adopt this strategy that we've prepared, and ultimately, in the years to come, to implement the strategies and the recommendations that we're going to introduce today, and that will flesh themselves out over the course of the next several months. So we'll begin with the process that we've undertaken. I won't take a lot of time on this. Many of you, as I mentioned, have been involved. The project team, I've got three of the team, our consulting team with us here in front. I've got Dave Schreiber with SAA Design Group, our lead consultant, handling much of the planning and landscape architecture and visioning work, public engagement work. Bruce Morrow, project manager working with Dave at SAA, and Michael Stumpf with Place Dynamics, handling a lot of the market analysis pieces. Also, we've engaged environmental and engineering consultants as well in this process. So we've got a comprehensive and holistic team, very important for a project like this. The work plan and schedule, I'd say we're about 60% of the way through it, maybe 70. From start to finish, we started late last year, in December of 2013. About a 12-month process probably by the time we get it through the adoption process. So again, we're about halfway through that. Substantial community engagement, I talked about that a few minutes ago, but we've engaged the press through the Gazette and WCLO. We've worked to establish a website. I directed many of you, or all of you, to that in the memo. We've worked with the DRC. I mentioned that's a group of folks from all over the community that have an interest in the downtown. Conducted over 30, I believe, maybe 40 stakeholder one-on-ones, individual conversations with landowners, business owners, folks at the DNR, those kinds of things, stakeholders to get different perspectives on what the opportunity and challenge is. And finally, the public workshops. We've worked really getting our hands dirty with members of the community from, again, all throughout the community to work on arriving at where we are today. Outside of that public engagement process, we've also done I should say the consultants really have done much of this work in gathering contextual data and research on the background from the 1921 John Nolan plan all the way through the 2013 Walker parking study. These guys have looked at what the context, what is the background of this place and its uniqueness and importance to Janesville. And they've also done some site-specific environmental, market, demographic analysis of the project area, and even those individual sites in some cases when they have issues that have been identified. So a lot of background data collection. Basically to arrive at a point where we can talk to the public and talk to you folks with some authority about what the challenges and what the opportunities are. Working with the public, we've set a number of goals. These are on the website. I don't think I'll go through these individually, but certainly we can call these back up later if you want to touch on one of them. Really, again, they're focused at making the downtown the heart of the community and activating our downtown and our riverfront through those opportunities at those challenge sites. Desired outcomes, these are the things that we hope the plan can help to leverage in real life once it's implemented. These I will touch on. We hope that the downtown and the riverfront are the first place you go with your friends and visitors. We hope that the community embraces the river. We hope that the local and outside investment is being made in new businesses, in new housing, and in new development opportunities. And finally, we hope that the downtown and the riverfront feel comfortable and safe for visitors, for residents, for all of us that work, live, and play downtown. Sort of a transition here, but into some of those key shaping factors, things that built the foundation from which the recommendations that we worked through with the public and with the DRC were based. Environmental and market were the two big ones that we wanted to call out today. These will be impactful in how the recommendations turn into implementation actions. On the left side, everyone's aware of it, of course, is issues of floodplain, floodway. Those are issues that have served historically to hinder redevelopment opportunity because of the presence of flooding conditions on certain sites. And you see the orange The stipple patterns are widespread, especially north of Centerway as we get closer to Traxler Park. So those issues are key and help to influence how some of the recommendations play out. On the right side, a result of a lot of the work that we did with the 400,000 EPA grant was to be able to identify some of those sites that have some known or suspected environmental challenges. We do have detailed data on each of these. If you'd like, we can touch on what some of the specifics are there. But as you can see through the orange and red boxes, many of these sites have some history of environmental condition. So the other shaping factor, and I will hand it over to Michael for this, is the market condition. Michael.
Okay. Well, as Ryan said, my role in this project was to look at the market, and I have pages full of numbers I can share with you, but Dave has asked that you be awake when we get to his point in the presentation. So what I like to do is maybe start out with a little comparison. There's about 600,000 square feet of commercial space in the Janesville Mall. In the downtown, just on the ground floor, not including any of the public buildings, the building we're in here, the county buildings, the churches, things like that, there's over 1.1 million square feet, almost twice the space that's in the mall. And then, as you can see, there's quite a bit additional space in the upper levels of those buildings. So in reality, there's about 3 times as much space in the downtown area as there is in the Janesville Mall. That's pretty significant. And if you look at the way that's distributed, first of all, I think one thing we do need to call out is there's quite a bit of vacant space, which is both a concern and an opportunity. Some of that space, as you well know, is city-owned or in the process of city acquisition and will be eliminated, so that will bring down some of the total. But a couple other things we want to point out is, first of all, when you look at distribution by type of use, you do see that there's a concentration of the retail on the west side of the river, and there's a concentration of the office uses on the east side of the river. Restaurants are about evenly split, and in terms of square footage, there's a little bit more on the west side of the river, only because you have your 2 larger restaurants, the former Speakeasy or Alio and the Armory around the west side, and those are the 2 larger. I think in terms of the actual market, let's see here. How do I advance this? Okay, thank you. So in terms of the market, what we looked at is the market opportunity for residential, for retail, for dining, and for office uses. And I think where we came down in looking at this is the market for residential is actually strong. The city is going to grow. There's a shift in the population, in the composition of households in the community. There's going to be growth, and that growth is at the, well, it's across the board, but we want you to focus on the higher end of the spectrum. We're talking about market rate rentals, a higher price point. If you look at the history of the city, there's been very little in the way of new rental apartments added in the last decade. There's a pent-up demand for that, and there's a pent-up demand at the higher end of the scale for a unique space offering something distinctive. And I think also the owner-occupied element and condominium and row house type development can both be accommodated in the downtown. We feel that combined a number of somewhere between 25, 30 owner-occupied units and 30 to 40 rental units per year is not unrealistic. So there's a very good opportunity, and that is where the strength lies right now, because the other sectors, it's not so clear. In the office sector, what we have is a situation where there's going to be some growth in office demand over the next decade, and there's an awful lot of empty space in the city, space that could be used as office space. That doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity, though, because there's more to an office space than simply calling it office space. There's location, there's quality, there's unique features. So the downtown has a few things going for it. First is the proximity to the courthouse. That is a major draw for a lot of businesses that interact with the courthouse If you think about where the attorneys are located in the city, they're for the most part on the east side of the river. And that creates an opportunity for some higher end boutique type space. And I think there's also the opportunity to renovate some of the existing space. The other thing that we see, and this is nationally, most of the employment growth is happening in small businesses. And when I talk about small businesses, I'm not talking about the SBA's 500-person business. I'm talking about that 1 to 10 employee company. And they're looking for a smaller footprint that really does fit within many of the downtown buildings that are currently sitting empty, or their second floor is sitting empty. Could very easily accommodate that space, and very unique space too. You can do exposed bricks and ceilings and things like that, which create a distinctive space that many of those businesses are looking for. On the retail side, we have a similar situation where truly there is no pent-up demand for retail except when you have a growing population or people are spending more. And in Janesville, you don't have a population that's growing that fast, and the spending growth is not occurring that fast. So we're not talking about new opportunities. What we're talking about is shifting opportunities. And if you think about, go back to 1998, if you logged onto the internet, you were probably using Magellan or Excite or AOL or somebody else who's no longer in existence. That was a saturated market when Google entered, and now Google captured that market. What we're talking about here is the same kind of thing. The opportunity for the retail, for the restaurants, is not because of growth of the market, but because of being better in the market. And being better in the market is part of the story that downtown needs to tell. For this to work, we really feel that the changes that you're talking about here in the downtown are creating that kind of environment that draws people, where people want to be, where you have unique space that you're not going to have out along the highway. On the highway, you've got a freestanding building sitting next to a 6-lane road on a frontage road. Not the most attractive environment, whereas in the downtown, you have the opportunity to create something on the river, outdoor seating, a eclectic environment where there's a lot of people milling about, where there's shopping going on, where there's a lot of activity that complements that dining, where there's a lot of activity that brings people in who can then go shop in those businesses. It really is, for the growth of those two elements, it really is the quality of the downtown environment that's going to make the difference there. As I said, I've got a lot of numbers, and I'm not going to go into them, but you can ask me about them when we get to the end of the presentation.
Good evening. My name's Dave Schreiber, and thank you for coming. As Ryan indicated, this is our kind of midway in the process here, and I want to continue on the discussion of what we've learned as background for both our strategy and the redevelopment proposals that I'm going to detail in a few moments here. I want to bring together what we learned from our one-on-one stakeholder interviews and from our public meetings at this point. And I think from the one-on-ones, we have quite a litany of, and I should move to that. Oh, all right. The one-on-ones. What we really learned there that there was a feeling of a lack of vision. People understood the 2007 plan, but what that meant on the ground and what that could be was lacking. We think a lot was in the 2007 plan was very solid in terms of space orientation, land use, that sort of thing. But what does that mean on the ground? So we're trying to capture some of that to respond to a lack of vision. Floodplain limits development, we heard that from the development community. From property owners, the need for public space. Where are we going to stage events in the downtown? What if you have a special event or a concert? Or we learned a lot about the aqua and the things they're trying to do, all the people they're bringing in. How can they handle bigger and bigger events without more space, more facilities to draw people? So again, additional public space. On the very positive side, the central location was commonly understood as a great location within the community. Geographically very centered, history, This is the most I've heard about people recognizing the history of their buildings and understanding the importance of those. That came out both the public and on our one-on-ones. Connectivity, parking, how do you get from the neighborhoods on bike or walking? How do you get up and down the waterfront? Parking, there is a perception that parking is an issue. The studies from 2013 say it is not. We have to grapple with that. The perception is reality. From the real estate community, we heard from a number of realtors that the business community does not value the downtown as a location. Now, is that the size of space or a place to do business or connectivity or access? A number of things we think add up in that regard, but it's not valued as a location to have a business. Obviously, a counterpoint to that is the hospital does a great job down here, that kind of facility. So I think it's probably just the history of land use patterns over time. So part of our story has to be to make this a destination. Public projects and when things are done have not been of the highest quality. The downtown looks tired. It does not look as sharp as it could. The assets are not being taken advantage of. Community reacted similarly in the public meetings. When we looked at the different exercises, we heard about vision, continuity, connectivity, activities, walkability, appearance, very positive about architecture. Key events that happen in the downtown, the farmers market, for example, that sticks in people's mind. That Irish Fest from last year, I guess that was the first time, mentioned all the time, jumped out. So those are great signs of potential. There was support for the continuation of the Riverwalk system, more public continuity of space along the river. Public space in general was a positive. Additional retail and housing, anybody would like to see that spends any time down here. Two-way streets were preferred over the one-way directional streets, and I think people recognize that with one-way streets, multiple lanes, traffic moves faster. If you were a business on Main Street and you were responding to that, you would say, I'd rather have a stop sign at every intersection and people going two ways. You know, it's create a lot of congestion maybe, but the idea, I think, is has merit from a standpoint of you can see the businesses, you can see people on street. The idea of a kayak course, and I think that is symbolic of river access, if not literally what people are talking about there, but that had been floated before we arrived, so that came back to us. And the idea of some sort of performance venue, the band shells, a place for music and special events. I think that showed up both at the Traxler Park, as well as some space, programmable space in the downtown. So let's, what do we do with these elements? This is about connecting the dots now. What Mike was saying, what Ryan was saying. Ryan went through a very eloquent, imagine this place, imagine this place. We really think this can happen. The market bears out some great potential for some of this really happening over a long haul, some of it maybe in the near term. But part of connecting the dots is what we're going to do with the next few slides as we share with you a plan. But what is the underlying strategy here? These are some key points to keep in mind. Expand Traxler Park down to Centerway. And we're suggesting that because there are some sites, some environmental contaminated sites, that may be possible. This is a one-time fork in the road. You could develop that space, you could refurbish that space with some of the uses of the day, or you could own that space and add something to the park. Consider expanding the park. Activating the river. Access, connection, events, activities, young, old. Activate the Rock River. If you want to look at your key asset, your most enduring asset, it brought people here originally. We need to acknowledge it can bring people here into the future. It was a start, it was the original economy. Maybe it can be a new economy if we think about it in the right way. Enhance and unify the streetscapes and the business communities on Milwaukee Street. Similarly, maybe a more entertainment kind of district on the Main Street corridor. develop and brand a space we're calling the town square, and I'll come back and describe that to you. But at the heart of the community, a real heart of the community, a place we can call the town square. Expand and complete the riverfront path and trail networks. Keeping these things in mind, they give us a framework for what we're thinking is a future vision. So let me break this up into some a north, a middle, and a south here, and give you a little closer look at what we're talking about here. Back on the Traxler Park end, and we are just showing the kind of the south end of Traxler right here. We've not gone into the park and plan that. There is a separate exercise. I think we're providing some background and context for that. But we're proposing that off of the highway corridor here, Parker Drive, that we have an access and an entrance feature. A major entrance to this is a park and a destination. Cross out, we're suggesting maybe that becomes an island again. Historically, that was an island in the river, and so we're just suggesting some sort of bridge or crossing or entrance element. But this is the greening of the park. This is the green space for the park that we're adding in here. The road is really right over here right now. We're suggesting that could move back closer to Parker. We get more space along the river. The ice house is down here. This kind of void right here is the railroad track area passing through there. Again, the ice house is in that location. That we have some larger, small picnic areas. We can add some parking to this area. We could preserve some of the history of the area. We provide a more formalized entrance. And our thought is that this largely the park, this space combined with the park up here, could be a larger festival site. A place that you might think of on a very grand scale, the Summerfest grounds in Milwaukee, on a very small scale, Willow Island at the Alliance Center in Madison, if any of you have been there. This is a much bigger space, but a dedicated space for specialized outdoor events. Now, the aqua jays are a big part of that. A big issue there, as Ryan mentioned, was the flooding conditions. About half of their site and right underneath all their bleachers is actually part of the Rock River floodway. That essentially limits development of that space. So I think thinking about the park in this space is how do we change the dynamics of the floodway and the floodplain to make that site predictably usable. Can't be predictable if you get 5 inches of rain over an evening and the river swells and runs like it is now. I mean, you're getting a lot of excess water. Hard to plan, hard to schedule events. But again, that's part of the master planning, but we have an opportunity with this space here. What do we do with that green space or redevelopment? We're directing it in the green space direction. Another element here is right now Parker Drive comes straight down here. We've suggested that maybe that drive move over to this edge, allowing us to consolidate land here and do a redevelopment rather than catching it between two streets. This would then line up with Main Street, so that rather than come down to that intersection at Centerway, jog a short block, and then make another turn if you want to go downtown, maybe a couple block relocation of that road right here, adding in some parking up here. We're suggesting this element down here, this kayak course. This would be the start of it if we went in that direction. Start here, visitors park there, some shelter facility here. This is all on that Adams site that was just recently cleared across the way. Some development and a local street, which would be Parker in the back here now. So an idea to think about. We bring traffic right to the entrance of downtown. We signify an entrance there, and voila, we perhaps have some business. If you don't want to go to downtown, of course, you make your turn on to Centerway and you're on your way. One of the issues, of course, you long-timers here certainly know that we've seen some water come across this way around the bridge and then down Main Street. If we rebuild this road here and we're dealing with the dike or the major embankment right here for the rail, that we could perhaps begin to control some of that water along this line here, so that could not enter the downtown. That could be an advantage of reconstructing. It could be done with an earth berm on the Adams site too, but I mean, this is just another thing that could come from that kind of longer term thinking. And of course, Ryan had that vision of being able to move along the east side from Traxler up here down and continue right on south past the library and head down to the Rotary Gardens and off into that area via a system you could connect with down there. This is part of that continuous system right here. Just a couple images here, walkways, park, river out here, some nice picnic spaces. Maybe some of that's naturalized if we're going to trade off some of that floodway area, floodplain area. We have to have some storage, so maybe there's some naturalized kind of spaces to accrue. The idea of a festival site, some pathways are all part of that. We had some marina dockage in there, perhaps some boats coming from 800 acres or so that are in water up to Indian Ford, that some of those boaters can come and dock into the downtown. A building, restroom, shelter at the kayak area, something like that going on, maybe boardwalk like this, a floating kind of structure that goes under that trestle. Just kind of a neat little spatial experience. Perhaps there's some, what does the housing look like? Multiple story housing between Main Street and Parker Drive in that redevelopment area, that there could be some housing. They're going to be looking out at a little marina space. They'd be looking out at this park space. Nice setting that we could be creating there. Let's jump to the middle section here. The key element of the middle section gets to be our Central Park area, and I want to just point that out as this space right here, the town square area. That's really this space right here. This is the old parking deck, of course, is in this space right now across the river. This space, when I refer to a town square, town centers kind of space, that's really the space we're locking right in there. So we have that downtown gateway up here if we change the road, or if not, we still have some sort of gateway element. We have that kayak course. If we really pull that off, we're suggesting that this become, we're just calling it Kayak Park. And the idea is that this would be a place, perhaps repurpose the building that is in there already, a tear down in here, some on-street parking that is there, that we have this little park strip that we could have people watching this kayak course, which would run along this zone right here where the B is. Takeout for that would be at Fireman's Park, for example. This would be comparable in size to what you see at Yorkville. Yeah, Charles City has one, yes, exactly. But Charles City just put objects in the river, whereas Yorkville, they actually breached a dam of similar height to your centerway to create a kayak course. My point is that it's about this length that we're showing in this direction. That got us down to here, which is Fireman's Park, which would be your takeout. And of course, the people that use the course then roam back up the street or back up the Riverwalk here and cross the intersection, get back in, and they keep doing this. And you want to see this in action, you can go close by to Albany. Have any of you ever been down there watching the people going up and down the street in Albany carrying their canoes or their tubes or whatever? You could go to downtown Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and see a lot of students that get in at Phoenix Park, drift down the river, take out at the south end of downtown, come back up along the Riverwalk, cross over the bridge, go back in and float on down again. So they're walking around with their big tubes and coolers and stuff. It animates the street. I think it's kind of cool. So our whitewater course, we've suggested the senior center get relocated up to this area. Needs more parking. Allows maybe some other opportunities in the downtown, maintains a central location. Could perhaps expanded facilities, could be maybe paired with some other uses that could be incorporated. We've already got some senior living facilities over in this area. We are looking at Riverwalk improvements. Those that we start up at Traxler would come all along this edge, this very important part at Milwaukee Street would get fixed so it is accessible and walkable. We also have some water entering that side of the river. Yeah, that is several feet lower than on the west side. The east side is. About 30 inches of wall work may have to be done there to fix that, raise the railing and get that. We would actually raise, put in like a Jersey barrier, that kind of thing. The walkway would probably more or less be at its same height, but some protection there could help with some of the flooding along here. This doesn't eliminate water in buildings. Groundwater that's entering basements and stuff will continue to do that. I'm just talking about if we are able to solve a problem up here on the Adams property, then it makes sense to start to raise the elevation along here where it is below the east side to eliminate where the water now enters. And there's a couple spaces where that does along this entire corridor here. So Firehouse Park, the east side improvements, restriping River Street up here. This is a source of some additional parking. We've got right away in here. We think we could pull that off. We could add a number of cars here. That's combined with some expanded parking over here. Again, we're looking for a couple offsets here to loss of, what, Bruce, we have 230? 215 or so on the deck here. Through a combination of some space in here, here, and over here, we can maybe mitigate that loss by about 100 cars. Still going to be a loss, but I think that is an opportunity. Both the location here at I and the location here would be future ramp sites. When we fill up those large unoccupied spots of the downtown, future ramp we think makes sense here, and we think something similar to that makes sense over time. But we can use part of this for surface parking that we are not now. Some mixed use in this area here. This area particularly is city parking lot now. That does come into play as a loss if development is to occur there, but this is a great development site. This is one of the couple sites we have on a river where a whole project could be oriented to the river where it is more difficult where we have established buildings, but a new project here, premier kind of location, could orient itself to the river, have public space, restaurants. It'd be great to have something that a banquet facility or a brew pub or something that provides reason for a lot of people to be downtown and want to be on the water. And think of how great that would be if we saw a lot of activity over, in this area working simultaneously. Milwaukee Street improvements. We know we're going to be working in the near future on some bridge improvements here. We encourage that those think about two things with that bridge beyond the structure and safety, etc., is that we'd like to see the walkways wider on the bridges. The 6-7 feet you have now is small distance for pedestrians. Picture yourself in rainy weather or in winter slush or something trying to cross a barrier like that with that water spraying on you and that sort of thing. Larger, more generous walkways that will also help this space function, make it easy for people to move to both sides of the river is a consideration. We also think the bridges, both the Milwaukee here and the Court Street here, are great art opportunities, a chance to incorporate some art elements into the bridge. They could be simple and utilitarian. On the other hand, they are an opportunity for little money to become distinctive elements. Marching down the list, the Festival Street over here, this is at the heart of our town square element. This section of river here be built as a festival street, basically thinking there that it would functions day to day as a street. It has parking, it handles traffic, and so forth. But given its location with street traffic moving east-west here, traffic moving east-west here, connecting streets up here, connecting streets over here, that the idea that you could shut this off intermittently for an art festival, a farmer's market, or something like that, and be able to not only use the street, but use the proposed space we have right in here with that, or maybe even part of Dodge Street right in there, for farmer's market, for art festival. That kind of thing could occur in this location as part of this park here. Pedestrian Bridge is part of this right here, a crossing. Ideally, over the long term, we have the Old Town Mall here, ability to come through there from parking over here, cross a bridge, come into the Dodge Street area, future parking deck here. Right at the end of Dodge Street right now, that right-of-way would allow us to also add some parking in that area. In the near term, we have to provide connection in behind to the River Edge building here. So as the street functions, that could also add some parking, take up some of that loss we have. K3 over here, some river stairs. Keep in mind when this deck comes out, that's a big undertaking. When that deck comes out, something has to be done with the edges. There's no edges there. We have to rebuild walls. We have to do something in terms of flood control to restore those edges. This is an opportunity when community says we'd like to have access. This is a very near-term opportunity to have access down to the water. That's why we're suggesting some stair here, some transition elements, and deck kind of things are being suggested over in this area. So the river stairs, a Civic Building in the long haul, this site right here, Civic Building, and I'll show you an example of that, what I'm thinking about in a moment there, but some sort of Civic Building there. We have the west side walkway moving all along here, of course, and it continues out along the edge of the building, ties into a little larger space here, and of course, as we move up, this is all Ice Age Trail, by the way, all along this edge, so we continue on to the system that is here already. We're also talking about maybe a water feature, town fountain, little spray play element, sculptural piece with some water, but some sort of feature element that would be part of that town space there. Let me give you this is kind of what we're looking at in a quick perspective of this space. We have Court here, we have Milwaukee up here, suggesting a building, some sort of civic building here. And by civic, I mean, could it be a discovery center, a children's museum, a museum to industry, GM-supported kind of thing? This is one of their home ports, if you will, you know. Get them involved in something, but a building that maybe has some public uses, and you know, a quasi-public kind of operation. The idea of the festival street here, and again, to make it clear, what I'm thinking about as a festival street is it does not have, in my mind, a traditional curb and gutter to define it. There may be elements for drainage and so forth, but it is more or less level and flows into the grass, but you can find where to plow and where to park, and all that becomes clear on a day-to-day use basis. But that is done here, maybe a little bit on Dodge. A similar treatment is actually on Water over here. Some parking, public space along the edge here. These are the stairs going down, our pedestrian bridge coming across here. These are just columns from the decking that is there. Do we do something with those? The structural report said the deck is shot. It said the columns are in great shape. Do we keep some of those? Floating gardens, sculptures on them that bob up and down as the water levels change. You know, there may be some ideas out there. Maybe they're all gone, but DNR approval, of course, would have to work with that. We're suggesting part of maybe even some deck areas could be cantilevered out on to some of that existing structure. So we use it to hold some pedestrian spaces, expand some of our shoreline. That's what we're suggesting along this edge here, that we actually use some of it. Again, here we're bringing these steps back down so that you can actually get access to the river in a more grand way. Flexible green space, a feature element here, plaza space over time, walkway connection on around to, this is that premier building site, some public space over here. Of course, the walkway on the east side does continue. Couple sections on the west side, using some of those piles to bring some of the decking out, expand some of that public space. We're on the west side here, some floating docks. Again, I suggested maybe some floating gardens, barges in the river that could be anchored to those columns, move up and down. On the east side, this is how we step down into the water. It's about an 8-foot distance that we gotta come down to make that under ordinary water conditions. A little closer today, it's the water conditions. So what does this start to look like? That park I mentioned, festival, or the kayak park, green space along the river here, people could watch what's going on in a kayak event. What happens, you know, some new things you may be doing in the river with access, chance to see some walkways moving along here. Want to get to the east side, to the west side? How about a zip line? You won't be the first to do it. Things like this are getting done, but you know, interesting ideas. It's trying to be a little cute, but a festival street in Galena, Illinois, one of the main streets by the post office, closes down. The animated sidewalks, part of reconstructing Milwaukee, Main Street already in progress, is being able to work with those sidewalks to be able to create that indoor-outdoor space. So if a cafe wants some outdoor seating, some things like that can occur. I talked about entrance features. Here's an example. Maybe as you enter Main Street, at that intersection, you drive in under some arch or something that says you're in the downtown. You've arrived. Again, what you can do on the street, a sense of a street with paving and storefronts along both sides. The plan suggested some development, even as part of that parking deck on the west side of River. And so if you picture this structure going back as a parking deck and lower shops along the front, that helps to tie both sides of the street together. Family access to water, is this steps coming down? Is this a water feature? Sculptural elements that are also play. Kids can do things on all sorts of objects. An example of a very large staircase down into the river here, but the idea of something cascading down, bridge. I talked about that public building. If this is our walkway coming off of Milwaukee and we're headed south here along the west bank of the river, special event going on, people crossing the Milwaukee Bridge, coming down along the building here, some sort of civic building, something, it's a grand spot for a big element that is part of this park space. Sunning spaces, whether that's at the festival park or whether that is further south towards the bowling alley, down towards the library. But the idea that people can use these green edges along the river for various uses. Alleyway connections, another example of putting a building and a walkway and some things between space, an infill kind of building. This is actually a children's museum facility. Providence, Rhode Island, floating these fire pots out in the river. Again, something you could do with those poles. This is a parking deck. Could be River Street here, storefronts here, parking deck inside that building that looks like a building but is really going to house some parking with some lower level shops. Again, all kinds of ideas I think are possible, and this just gives you a flavor across the board for when people suggest things to us, what are the possibilities that we could get going here, and how is it played out elsewhere. This is the final section here, and then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty of some of the priorities and strategy here. The south section. We are looking at, we're catching the Milwaukee here and Court here. We're largely focused on this area here. Again, the walkway element continues down. The old jail site here, open today, an initial development site potential that could extend to the north. We've got the senior center right in here for your reference. We've got the jail site here with development, formalizing the Water Street here, creating another development site. This is in where the alignment shop is. So again, a mixed use or all housing are possibilities along, we think, along this edge here. Over the long term, redeveloping of these sites here. The hardware site starts here and goes off this way. Note that a couple elements like these streets that come down, I'm going to show you some images. The streets that come through the city and end at the river are very important elements that we can take advantage of. They're like neighborhood links, if you will, that can bring people to the riverfront. Suggestion down here is what we've called an urban beach. And I'll just show you what that could look like. The bowling alley element is right in here. That urban beach. Walkway along the edge here, raise an element, put in some sand. No reason we couldn't have a beach for the residents of the Fourth Ward. You know, the residents that live over in that neighborhood. It's an urban space. It could be lawn today, could be a beach in the future. That housing I mentioned, to get parking underneath, it's partially elevated, allows people to walk along the front. Some little green buffer in here, but a Riverwalk with some 3-4 story housing could be along the east side of the river. Could be something contemporary raised like this. Street ends. You come down the end of a street. What do? We wouldn't have the grade change that's here, but the idea is that you can come out to an overlook, hang out in the river, a little small park right on that right-of-way that is already at the river there is something that could happen in a number of locations, particularly south of Court Street. Okay, implementation approach. I call it approach because I'm going to not throw out facts and how-tos, but more the scope of what we're thinking about. We haven't gotten to that point yet. The hard work we've done is right up to where I finished with kind of the design and the concepts. The parts that we're working on now are testing the market, implementation, looking at our funding sources, and then trying to prioritize our key projects here, particularly for the near term. So, implementation approach. The idea of making place ties back to Mike's comments about the market, ties back to Ryan's comments about imagine this. That's about placemaking. So part of the implementation approach in order to attract a market is that we need to create an identity and a brand that is distinctive for downtown. Ask yourself, what is the brand today? Don't answer that now, but when we get done with this, we hope to be able to say, this is the kind of brand and place we have. We need to support the market interest. If the market demands a place, the market demands a why. Why should I come here and put my money down on this place? Well, if I could have housing or an office or a hotel room looking at a kayak course, that's kind of a good why. There aren't too many places in Wisconsin a person could do that. That could be a why. If I have an active festival site going on, I might be interested in what I can do in the second story of an existing building. That's a why, and people want to rent that. We've seen some great examples of some of the second, third story apartment buildings in the downtown. We need to push that kind of idea along. That goes to the why. Supporting the market interest. It's about the story, it's going to be about the place. Infrastructure. We have to accommodate parking today, we have to accommodate parking in the future. We need to make these key decisions on one-way and two-way streets. We need to make sure that we are thinking about pedestrians first in our infrastructure, so our walkways, our bike connections need to be a priority. This needs to be a pedestrian-friendly an activity-oriented place. That's what infrastructure is going to be about. The role of partnerships. partners come at all levels. We have local. It's going to be the your downtown organization. We need to strengthen and scale up, I think, that organization. We have the local government, of course, you folks sitting in that, but we have partners at the state level, the DNR, for example, the DOT on these bridges. The state's Main Street program has just recognized the City of Janesville by adding you to this Connections program. That's a step towards getting back into the Main Street program where you were at one time. That's a plus. At the federal level, Environmental Protection Agency's been very generous. We want to keep riding that horse, I think, because there's stuff to be done with these sites in preparation and cleanup and so forth. We can't forget the private sector side here that are going to be doing things. And I'll talk a little more about some of the private side of this in a bit here when we talk funding. An action plan. What are the catalytic projects that are going to move this forward? That's something we need to work through, get to the priorities. We need to get to organization. We also have to have some organization, in my experience, to move these kinds of projects forward. Some communities, it's a Main Street program. Some communities, it's business improvement districts. Some places, it's a private development corporation. Other places, it's citizen and government-led, I'll call it a project management team, but they have a focus on the downtown or a focus on the neighborhood, and they work towards that. Our funding strategy, partnerships, downtown prioritization. The big one we get down here is commitment. You know, that's about adopting a plan like this, and it's about prioritizing it for a period of time. It's going to take years to do this, just no doubt about it. But commitment is about leadership and making a commitment to put this as a priority. If we translate this into funding, a very important part of this, we got the tax increment financing, we have grants, we have EPA grants, DOT grants, DNR, National Endowment for the Arts is another place. The Kellogg Foundation out of Michigan is another that in the upper Midwest offers grants on urban development. The private dollars, we have, of course, the major investments that the private sector can make in redevelopment of new properties, redevelopment of existing properties. That needs to be motivated along, and that can be on grant levels like facade grants or second-story development grants. Come into play there. Tourism money, state and local. If we're going to have a name and a place and a brand, tourism, hotel taxes, that sort of thing can come into play. A business improvement district is a very important element when these places are up and operating. Events, operation, maintenance are kind of their key responsibility. And we have to look at capital budgets here. And I think the important thing about capital budgets is that some of the hard work does have to be done by the city, but there's also opportunities for leveraging. And setting up monies to leverage other monies are an important element. In effect, you're doing that with TIF, and you're doing that with some matching grants and so forth. But very importantly, capital budgets are going to be an important part of the commitment here. I want to turn to near-term priorities. These are recommendations that have come from the Downtown Revitalization Committee. At our last work session, these were the elements of all the things we presented of possibilities over the next 5 years. These were the elements that jumped to the top. And we put some of the price tag. By the way, that should be 400 there, not 4,000. But that'd be kind of an odd element. But anyway, it's more like 400 for some of the public space and riverfront stuff. But the numbers, we have some numbers in here that just represent kind of the magnitude of what's to be encountered here. Now, none of these numbers, in my mind, are overwhelming because we are able to find grants, private investment, foundations, that we can tie to. So when we're thinking about that town square, we've got major dollars that are involved in clearing that deck. DNR is a logical partner there. Stewardship programs can help with walkways. Urban Rivers can help with public spaces. National Endowment for the Arts can fund artists and or art installations. So those are examples of tying dollars back in to work against some of these costs that one encounters here. Other parts, if we're making wholesale street reconstructions, maybe it's DOT, maybe it's local money. If at time some of your streets just are coming up for reconstruction, we just have to absorb those. So those work out of the capital. Others, we can look at longer term programming and chasing the funds that are going to be related to those. Final slide here. Public open house is coming up here. Some of the exhibits that we've shown you here today are going to be out. City staff is going to be inviting some public comment in that regard. The consultant team is out testing market feasibility. We're talking with developers who we talked with initially, saying here's a plan, here's an idea, here's some of the strategies we're thinking about. How does that work for you or not? And some of the things we're hearing that we heard again, still tell us about the place, still give us a story, help us with the why. That's where we've started that ball rolling. We didn't have a plan before, now we've got some ideas and say, this is what this place could be. You want to get in early, you want to get in later. The action plan and strategy goes back to that previous slide. What are the priorities here? We need community input, we need Plan Commission Council input on those priorities yet. You're seeing them tonight as the DRC gave them to us after we offered a variety of alternatives here. The Downtown Revitalization Committee, we're going to be back working with them on our findings from talking with the real estate community, our findings in talking with staff on implementation strategy. So we're going to be going over our ideas and options at that August meeting. From there, we're headed to a draft of the plan, a final public meeting, and as we get into November and Thanksgiving holiday, we look to be really back here with final approval and asking for your input in that regard. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. Questions?
Any questions from the commission or the council? A lot of information we just shared with you, understanding. But yeah, Jim, go ahead.
One question, you mentioned the PID.
Yeah.
And, yes,
I'll repeat it.
okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned the PID as being a possibility.
Mhm.
Can you just mention briefly what that would entail? Isn't there?
Yeah.
There's participation.
Yep.
Of owners of voting and so on.
Yes, the question from Council Member Farrell was in regard to a business improvement district, a BID, BID, and what that would entail and how that would be set up. That would entail participation, as you mentioned, direct participation in a financial sense from each of the property owners within a recognized geographic boundary, the district itself. They would have to commit to establishing that district geographically, establishing a work plan, a project plan, a bid manager. It would become an entity that would effectively manage the downtown for itself by a contribution, financial contribution based upon whatever arithmetic they chose to use on an annual basis that would fund that type of program. Could involve anything from doing street cleaning, building streetscapes, doing some of these redevelopment projects, being a partner in those sorts of ways, to simple management of events and those kinds of things. It would really be defined by the members of the district at that time.
But it takes what percentage of the owners to have a bid district set up? Is there like a percentage threshold, like so 75% or something like that?
Well, it can be So they have to vote to create it. The question was, does it take a percentage of bid owners to set it up? They have to petition the city and to create the district. It can be defeated if it's been defeated in Janesville in the past based upon valuation and over geez, I'm forgetting the number. 30, I believe it's 30% of the total assessed valuation in the district voting against the creation. So it does have to be a sort of a consensus-based initiative.
George.
Along that same line with the bid, it was mentioned the streets program,
Main Street.
Main Street
Yep.
program. Will we be pursuing also trying to develop the Main Street program? Because that usually too involves some participation and usually
Yep.
The hiring of an executive or a manager or something.
Correct.
So would we be doing both, approaching both of those aspects, or trying to focus on one?
Commissioner Bruner's question was whether the city would pursue Wisconsin Main Street designation through the Wisconsin Main Street program or bid either or both. I think at this stage, we just recently were accepted into the Connect Communities program through the same organization that runs the Wisconsin Main Street program. For lack of a better word, Connect Communities is sort of the junior level Main Street. It's an introduction to the way of thinking and to a lot of the programs that Main Street does. You make a great point. In order to be a Main Street community, you have to have staff. You have to have a budget of at least $70,000 a year. Would that be funded entirely by a bid, by the city, taxpayers? All that stuff would have to be figured out. I think we would like to use this opportunity as part of the Connect Communities program to raise awareness of why that would be of benefit, if it would be of benefit, to join the Main Street program. If we think it would be, working with the council, with members of the community, members of the Downtown Revitalization Committee, the DDA, getting those folks involved. If we feel that it's worth the investment, I think we would advocate to take it that further step.
Just for clarification, are there Main Street programs that are totally government funded and those that are privately funded within the state?
I think as a general rule, I think they're partnerships. I think typically the community, and you've got some experience, typically the community will have some dollars in the game, as well as the business community.
Yes.
The private.
That'd be my experience too, that it's, and they're in different percentage. It's not a 50-50 or 10-90. It's all over the board with, but I think the final answer is that both those programs are often mixed together.
Mr. Keeley.
I guess mine's kind of a two-part question. One being, as the council just took action to close out a few downtown TIF districts, with the development, we'll be looking for a catalytic site to reopen a TIF district in the downtown overlay. And then part two of that was, could the increment generated from that specific project be used to essentially fund some of the other projects that were?
Yeah. So the question from Mr. Keeley, number one, relating to the city having just closed 4 TIF districts, 2 of which were directly in the downtown. Would the city be waiting basically for a catalytic project to open a new TIF district downtown? I think right now that's kind of where staff feels we should be. We feel like we're getting close to having sort of something to sell. We're having the conversations with developers now. Rather than creating speculative TIFs, we've seen how that has unfortunately not succeeded on West Court Street and Highway 51. Rather than creating speculative TIFs in the downtown, we feel maybe patience for 6 to 18 months is warranted. It may prove though that West Milwaukee Street, the bridge really needs to get done, and by the way, so does the parking deck, and by the way, they're adding up, and it may make sense at that time to try and bond for some of that through TIF. But I think right now we're hopeful to be patient for a catalytic project to come through, and we're confident that we can see that happen. The second part, could some of the public improvements that we've shown be used for the increment based upon a catalytic project be used to make some of that stuff happen? That's how it works. I mean, yes, major project, we have an identified infrastructure project, whether that's a parking deck or a riverfront walkway or the town square. They say, you know, we see these as going hand in hand. I think that's how we would certainly approach it.
I'm Ed Madera, Planning Commission. I had just kind of, would the plan include the kind of the soft things, for example, code enforcement, especially, you know, because one of the things we're looking to do, of course, is to create new opportunities, you know, new buildings and so forth, but it would also help to improve the existing structure. And I sometimes
Yes.
wonder if code enforcement might be helpful. And then the second thing is making the path to development as easy as possible for developers. So perhaps is the plan going to recommend to the city that it review its development process? So when the developer comes in, it's kind of a one-stop shop and they can move quickly to going ahead to do it, to eliminate the frustration.
Yeah, Commissioners, Madera's question number one was, will the plan include soft recommendations, things such as code enforcements, those kinds of things? And I think the second was pretty closely related to that. Will the recommendations themselves propose to the city that they change development codes, development processes, things like that? Dave, you're going to write the plan, I think.
Yeah.
I'll let you answer.
I think these things will be outlined, but what that code change is, you know, for example, if we're going to be developing so that we're looking at the river, we'd have to make sure that your codes allow buildings to look out that side versus, you know, based upon how they define front and, you know, that sort of thing. So we'll have to rely on staff to help us identify maybe some issues that have to be cleaned up there. In talking to the development community and people who have attempted some downtown redevelopment of existing buildings, now they cited fire code issues as being a lingering problem, how stairways are interpreted and access is interpreted and so forth. And we already know that is one that may need some looking at. But we're not going to solve those or propose changes. We're going to identify what the issue is and what needs to be resolved as part of the implementation strategy.
I think the short answer is wholesale. I think we recognize that that our development codes, not only in the downtown, but throughout, could use a fresh look. The 2007 plan made substantial recommendations about amending the zoning code. The comprehensive plan has done so, I think. Those are all things that I think will be echoed as they apply here.
One thing,
Jim?
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I was a little kind of somewhat disappointed. I know there was talk of having a hotel downtown. Is there any sort of market analysis that would indicate that that would be an appropriate place? It seems
question.
to me we have a lack of hotels.
Yeah. Yep. Councilmember Farrell's question asked about the feasibility from a market standpoint of a hotel downtown. Michael?
That wasn't something that we were charged to look at specifically. However, when that issue came up, we did pull some numbers in terms of the existing market, which has about a 41% occupancy and I think roughly $29.50 average daily revenue per room. Those are weak numbers. There's not much of a demand for a hotel within the market, and if there were, the downtown at the moment wouldn't be a good location for it. Now, 10 years from now, assuming all these catalytic changes occur, you could have a very different market where that would be a possibility. But right now, we wouldn't even recommend doing the additional study to look at the question.
Commissioner Voskuil?
First, I'd like to thank you, Ryan, and other city staff, Dale and Dwayne, for the partnerships that resource allocation. You referenced it early on, which is the number of grant dollars that we received up to this point, and the partnership with SSA as a result of some of those grant dollars. And I think it's really important that we continue the opportunity that we have within those grant dollars. And it's kind of a two-part question, I guess, just from an experience to kind of put it in perspective. What other Wisconsin communities can you think of really that have received the amount of grant dollars in the short amount of time that we've received from the organizations to move this whole project forward? It's really quite amazing. Two $700,000, one loan, one grant, one $200,000 in a very short window of time. And so it's kind of, we got to go when the going is hot. And Dave, you made reference to the fact that there are other partnering opportunities both at the state level and at the federal level. So I think that's really important as we look at catalytic projects, where we can get those partnerships. Along that same line, though, I'm going to kind of dovetail into that catalytic opportunity, which is what current projects do we have potentially upcoming in the very near future? Could we merge some of this into? You referenced bridges and things like that. Is there an opportunity to kind of merge some of those projects, maybe still highlight some of the grant resource opportunities, maybe the TIF, that kind of thing, things that may not be so far away, because I think, what people want is they want to see progress. And once you get some kind of catalytic conversion going, a lot of other opportunities kind of develop as a result of that.
Yeah. So Commissioner Voskel's two-part question. Number one, what other communities have experienced success in piggybacking grants on one another, the way that the city has been fortunate enough to do in recent memory. And the second, what projects are sort of on the horizon here in the city that we could use to dovetail with some of the funding opportunities. I'll probably let Dave handle most of the other communities. I think he's probably maybe been a little bit more immersed in what's going on statewide. I do know from an EPA standpoint, our nearest cohort that I would acknowledge would be the city of Milwaukee and the city of Wausau. Both have very similar over the last couple of years. Milwaukee a bit longer, but have really gone back to the well with EPA with success. And the reason they've done that is because they've used the dollars that EPA has given them. They've made it a point to identify. We went through the identification process that helped us draw this map to do the prioritization of where are the catalyst sites. They spent those dollars to target at those catalysts, which is what we're doing. We've ticked off 3 of the top 5 of our top brownfields through that inventory and prioritization process in terms of getting an assessment done on those. But they've used those dollars, and that's what we intend to do through sort of aggressively marketing this program and this opportunity, because those 2 communities I mentioned, in terms of EPA dollars, are geographically and in a market standpoint really not in the same ballpark as us. So we're a unique animal I think in this region. So I want to play that as a benefit. But maybe Dave knows of a few other communities that have had success.
That's why they have to listen.
Yeah.
I just think putting it in perspective,
Yeah.
this is an exception to the rule.
Yeah. Yep.
And we really need to capitalize on that opportunity for future partnerships.
Yeah, and in terms of projects that are on the horizon or pipeline, the Plan Commission reviewed tonight the potential acquisition of a property within sort of our town square catalyst area, and a previous Plan Commission and Council authorized the acquisition of 55 South River, the old Plaza Furniture site. We have a grant in place, in application with WEDC to conduct additional assessment and finally demolition work there. That's a project. It's not bright and shiny, but it's work that has to be done, I think, to implement some of this stuff. Main Street is coming up now. Does Main Street weave directly into one of these projects? Probably not. I mean, it's already so far down the line. But in terms of leverage, when we go to groups like the DOT or the DNR, the EPA, again, we can show that we've made that investment. That the dollars that you'll be directing towards project A, B, or C are not, in a vacuum, but they're actually a part of a series of dominoes that we're hoping to knock over through these processes. Milwaukee Street, you also mentioned the bridge. It's been programmed. We've been fortunate to receive some federal, I believe, money to rehabilitate that bridge. Maybe an opportunity to look, as Dave suggested, at a slightly bigger picture, or maybe a substantially bigger picture of opportunity there. The courthouse amphitheater is another investment that we're making in the downtown that, again, while it doesn't directly tie to maybe any specific project in terms of alignment of funds or bundling funds, it's a leverage point where the city has committed, again, dollars to make the place. And I think that's the story that we're hearing. We have to address with the development community and really with funding partners. They're going to want to know that that we're really thinking about this in a holistic but focused way.
I kind of hit on a couple things that I was going to bring up, so some of this is review a little bit. But first off, the Main Street, we're planning on improving that, as you just mentioned, in the future. Is the improvements that we're contemplating doing, are they consistent? Have you reviewed with your consultants for that and got their input on things that they might want to see different, or things that we hadn't thought about that we could incorporate into the Main Street? And then take that same thing and then we'll go on to the Milwaukee Street, the bridge in the Milwaukee Street ones. I believe there's still time to tweak that, and how do we coordinate those with this plan if we decide to go forward?
Councilmember Markline's question was about aligning thoughts and plans for Main Street that are already in process, as well as Milwaukee Street. Main Street and Milwaukee Street, those two are in different places. I will say from a Main Street perspective, I think the design plans themselves actually haven't been formalized or delivered publicly yet. I think that's late July. Yeah, second public meeting in July. So in terms of alignment of that design, the design I don't think is really far enough along that they've been able to see exactly what it is and make that comment. As a part of the public process, that coordination will take place. Milwaukee Street, I would agree, I think is still in the future enough that actual design plans have not been completed for that project yet, and the opportunity to, again, try and weave some of this stuff into there does exist.
You're looking at it purely from a design, urban planning thing. We don't talk to the landowners about their aspirations or desires in some of these areas. So, for the ones that are affected, when does their input come through as far as if this meets their long-term needs? And I'm specifically looking at the Centerway across from Adams Furniture, where we're redesigning the 51 corridor.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fair amount of ongoing business in that area that would be basically have to move. And we obviously just went through moving people out of the way for a public project with some controversy, and we're sensitive to the fact that where do they hear about it first? And so curious on how it goes for landowners who are affected with this plan. When do they get a say on it, and how do we keep it consistent with their vision versus the plan, which I'll follow up, depending on your answer.
Yeah, that's Councilmember Markline's question. Where do landowner visions come into play when we're preparing plans like this? I think in this case, the example you cite at Centerway, I don't think we met individually with each of those landowners, but I will say where they hear about it first is actually the 2007 downtown plan, which did show a realignment of Centerway, much slightly different than what's proposed here, but the same basic sort of parameter, that road realigning, and substantially impacting those. Where they first hear about it, in many cases, is through this process. We have public meetings for that reason. We tried to have several one-on-one stakeholder meetings with many of the landowners in each of the 6 catalyst sites that we chose with EPA. And I'll let Dave expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we did meet with the landowners that were available and interest to talk about this. And Ryan is correct that over in that area, we talked with Hendricks only, which was on the other side of the railroad area there. So we have a chance to go back and revisit if it's, if it gets to be that important. I think the decision on whether you're really going to commit to this in the near term, I would suggest that what we do with this plan is decide if that is really a worthy project given its costs, not only at state level and changing a local road to a highway, right-of-ways, all of that stuff. That may not rise to the top. If we're dealing with 20 years of activities here, I am trying to focus staff and the committee on what we can realistically do in 5 years. And that's what we ought to concentrate our time and our conversation and our strategies on. Some of this stuff clearly has to be mentioned as longer term thinking like that, but right now that as a project from the Downtown Review Committee has not risen as a priority here. So I guess I would not suggest we get ourselves distracted over there when more importantly we could be dealing with the project.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think what's shown for that site in particular is one that if anything, does it motivate a private developer to see that opportunity of creating that critical mass at that corner and say, you know what, I think I could return enough investment there that acquisition of those half dozen properties makes financial sense to me. City, are you committed to realigning this road if I put in, you know, 18,000 square feet of retail and 4 levels of residential above it? Are you going to make that marina happen? Are you going to make that road happen? Then that's where it, you know, that's where it kind of boils down. It's not proposed as, I don't think it's, and I would hope it's not proposed as the city should make all of this happen in and of its own accord. That's not the suggestion.
What would happen on this plan if we adopted it and a landowner on any one property had a decision to go forward with something contrary to this? How does this plan and their wishes coexist?
Well, I think if you, having adopted the plan, do have kind of control over the outcome in the sense of a design guideline. What we're doing is not literal that, you know, the triangle we put down there needs to come back as a triangle, but it's intended as a guideline. What are the pieces? There's a building element, there's a public element, there's an access element. How do they put those together? And that's why we show some pictures to give people a sense of what we're thinking about. And I think you rely on the development community to use their initiative within the context of this document, as approved, to come up with a plan that mirrors the thought behind it, not the detail or the color of the brick, but the thought process. I mean, that's certainly the case in terms of redevelopment. Now, for example, City of Milwaukee, if any of you have walked the riverfront there, all of those riverfront sections were developed by the adjoining private landowners, but they could only do that by having design guidelines. So that is another step in this process that, not that we're doing as part of this, but in another phase of this may be to develop guidelines for the downtown in certain areas where you lay out specifically what is to be done, so you get a one-for-one kind of response.
And then the last one I had is, there's some projects that are been proposed or even going forward that I know are outside the 6 areas that we're talking about. We talked about the pavilion at the lower courthouse. Let's talk about the thing by JPAC. And now we're proposing another area, and how do we address the concerns of Joe Public that says, you know, we're just put all these things all over, why can't we just have one good one, so to speak, or, you know, are we throwing cards all over willy-nilly?
Sure.
Your plan doesn't address those, and I think that's because it's outside the area, but it seems like that should be a focus, that should be at least acknowledged in your plan.
Member Markline's question is about a couple of proposals that have become public about additional event, festival, outdoor spaces, one at between JPAC and the library, and one, as I mentioned earlier, courthouse, lower courthouse park. How do those fit in? And are we just throwing the same solution at a number of problems? I'm paraphrasing, but I think they complement each other in that, and you're right. We should acknowledge them on the bigger picture, sort of the bigger overall framework plan, which is another element we didn't, plug into this session because it was long enough. That does acknowledge some of those context pieces, those things that impact it. I think they complement each other in that they are of different character and of different scale. The one on South Main Street between JPAC and the library is envisioned as not a festival space so much as a venue. 8 times a year, 10 times a year for very large events, concert, performing arts types of events. But most of the time as a large public park that happens to have a stage that could be used by community groups as well for smaller groups. Courthouse Hill, much smaller in scale, smaller in its different in its context and location. I think again directed more towards those community events, but not necessarily to have to be a performing arts venue. Also for public speaking events, Christmas tree lighting ceremonies, weddings, those kinds of things. So a different venue for a different scale and type of event. The town square, not really necessarily for the performing arts, but really just for people to watch, to sit and relax by the river. Maybe to have a art fair or a Renaissance fair, or you name it, that kind of thing. And then as we get up to Traxler, the suggestion, while we're not really doing, or this program isn't writing the plan for Traxler, that's a concurrent effort. We're encouraging that to really be that festival space, that large festival space that is all those things combined. It's music, perhaps art, culture, dining, water sports. Certainly, my perception, they are all different venues and with different purposes.
I would agree with that. I think the town square is the day-to-day kind of space. That's the intent. Public in the downtown gathers. If you work there, if you come to farmers market on Saturday, it's intended to be that kind of space. And why there? Because the people who come there and park can go to the coffee shop, can go to the resale shop, can go to the frame shop, can go to a restaurant at lunch, and it's all together.
And what we're trying, what we're very hopeful to create is a place that 365 days a year there's a reason to be there. And hopefully very soon that involves the businesses that are down there, but also the dynamic diversity of public spaces that are down there. If it's only 8 events a year at the JPAC space, that's probably only 8 days where you really get, literally thousands upon thousands of people downtown for any one event. But if there's something going on there, and there also happens to be that weekend, the art fair on the town square, and that Thursday there was a concert in the courthouse park, well, all of a sudden, every day there's 300 people there, 2,000 people there, 1,500 people there. Businesses see that activity. We feel that our purpose from the public standpoint is to create that place, to create that sense of activity, a reason to be there. And you've got to have good spaces to do that. The Riverwalk, those kinds of things are all a part of it.
Like you're keeping the west side of the river open, public space, but on the east side you're proposing all sorts of redevelopment, housing, etc. Why the difference?
Commissioner Adler's question is why the difference between treatment of the west side and the east side of the river. West side mostly open, east side additional new development and redevelopment.
I would not characterize them as going to be all that different spatially. What adjoins them may be different. For example, in the town square, the green space adjoins it. If you go on the east side, we would have probably the same size circulation walk moving north-south. Well, south of Court Street, they're going to be exactly the same in terms of the public space moving through there. We have, let's go march south of Court Street. We have the green space on the corner. We have the bus, the transient center. We have the walkway paralleling. Hopefully we can get by the bowling alley. We get to the beach area. If you go further south towards Racine, you've got the park space that the city has developed there, very open. As you come down then the east side from Court, we're suggesting that there's redevelopment. There's a walkway. That redevelopment we showed you is set back, maybe 20-foot public right-of-way, maybe 20-foot green space. Then we get to the library and the library parking area. We get to the venue space, which is the city park space between JPAC and the library. And then we're back on the path down to Racine. So in my mind, they're similar. Would your suggestion be we have more green space then on the east side? All right.
I mean, River Street is open to the river. Water Street, you're going to put buildings, 3 and 4-story buildings.
Yes.
That's not open to the river.
True.
I guess I would respond. We do, the terminus of each of the public streets, the streets themselves serve as public space in both cases and terminate at the river, providing sort of that a smaller park sort of feel. I think, again, one of the catalyst sites identified with the EPA is the Water Street, the former jail site. Friendly ownership there, I think that is one that could be viewed as a prime redevelopment opportunity. So that struggle between how do we treat the river here versus everywhere is one that, a very good question, and one that I think we should probably continue to have with the DRC.
And I'll throw in from your market guy. The other thing that we frequently look at is the private development that's going to generate the increment, and where is that going to occur? And having quality development spaces along the riverfront is going to be the primary motivator for developers to take interest in the downtown.
Mr. Fair.
I have to ask this question about the senior center, but not because I'm longer.
Yeah.
But am I correct? I know we're going to relocate the senior center. The current building, would that be refurbished or demolished? That's a story.
Oh, I think totally reused. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
It'd make a wonderful art museum kind of place. Yeah.
For the folks still tuning in, the question was whether the existing senior center was going to be preserved, with the recommendation that the senior center be relocated north at the intersection of Main and Centerway. Whether the existing senior center would be refurbished, remodeled, demolished? How would we treat that? The answer, that's a Carnegie Library in great. Yep.
Oh, oh, no.
Yep. No, we propose keeping that. Ooh. Yeah, early
yeah.
1900s.
Yeah.
I'm sure it says out front. You should know, Jim.
So, just to kind of bring it full circle, where do we go from here?
Commissioner Vasco's question, where do we go from here?
Well, we have a lot of ideas out here. We need more testing with the DRC. We need more testing with the marketplace. We need to consolidate our plan and design recommendations around questions. Do we have enough open space on both sides of the river, public space? Do we have enough development sites, I think, to respond to some of the market opportunities that we are finding? And we need to work through that implementation strategy, things like the code or the development process, or the organization. Are we, is it appropriate to get back into Main Street? I mean, we think it is, and we'll create an argument for why we need somebody to manage the downtown. So we have to pull that implementation strategy together. So we have continuing work to do to get back to the DRC and then back to the public on recommendations.
Yeah. Let me.
Well, my follow-up question though is, what is your expectation of Plan Commission and the City Council in the process moving forward?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is the expectation of the Plan Commission and City Council? Commissioner Vasco's question, moving forward.
Well, our expectation is that you will give this a critical review as we start to produce the written reports and the design documents to see that we are indeed addressing your questions and concerns. And then we will be visiting with you to hear those out and continue to refine that plan.
Yeah.
All towards our November kind of target.
And so the website will be kept up to date as those products are produced. The DRC meets publicly August 12th was the date, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There will be an additional public meeting, 14th. Okay, August 14th, the DRC will meet. That'll be here next door in the next room over 416. There will be an additional public meeting after the open house, which will be much of the same content. I would encourage you to come bring some more questions after you've had some chance to look at it. And then there will be one more after that. So there will be opportunities to monitor progress, both online and in person. But where we go from here, we keep throwing the word implementation strategy out there. Really, where this plan or this project began was to drill down on the actions it's going to take to get that done. That's the hard work that Dave mentioned. We're just getting underway. Where we're at today is that critical turning point. Have we substantially hit the mark with something that the market tests out for the most part, and the community buys in terms of feasibility and desirability? So as we sort of transition into that, okay, we think so. For the most part, we're on target. DRC says, here's your highest priorities. Go after them. So what we do is identify how we make those happen. What are the partnerships? Do we need to work with the DNR on this project? Do we need to work with the EPA to do additional testing? Do we need to work with the landowner or the landowners, because it's a high enough priority that we need to see what the sticking points are to making that happen? That's what the implementation strategy is going to start to spell out. It's hard to sit up here and talk about that because it really is, I think I used the word playbook very early on. It's the playbook that we're going to use moving forward once this is adopted, when we have those conversations and when we come back to the council with a project idea. So it's going to spell out the how we do it. I think that's the important thing to note. And you'll be able to monitor us as we move into that.
Anything else?
Could I just ask one? How is this going to be sold to the community, assuming that everything's approved and so forth? Because, I would suggest that probably if you went around and took a survey right now, maybe 1 person in 20 even knows this process is going on. And importantly, sometimes in Janesville, we're going to try to build a remarkable fire station.
Well, Commissioner Madeire's question, how is the project going to be sold to the community in terms of building awareness and buy-in? The strategy is we've started to employ anyway. We've worked with the Janesville Gazette to publicize what we've been doing. They've run 3 features so far. They'll run a 4th before the public meeting. And we'll continue to try and keep them sort of as our, our sounding board. In addition to that, the public forums that we'll have just as a part of this process, but once it's adopted, something I've already begun to do is to work with service organizations, business member clubs, things like that, to say, hey, here's what we're working on. The website, you can try as hard as you want to hit as many people as possible, yeah. But we're earnestly trying to make sure that the awareness and the buy-in is there, and we'll continue to do that.
I just add to another point that I think beyond this project, the process of selling to the community doesn't end. I think it actually starts, and some things to consider that can be within an implementation strategy are what you might do in some of your public spaces now. Just as you drive by a vacant lot and there's an illustration of a new building to go there, why can't we take some of these plan graphics, transfer them to outdoor product and put them up on corners? You have some great public spaces that are on corners at the ends of the bridges and stuff where something like that could sit. And that we could think through some of those things. This project won't result in that, but these are things you lay out to get on the ground, because I do think it does take time to absorb beyond the project. And in fact, that's a great way to just make it alive to people down there every day.
Any other questions or comments or suggestions, anything like that? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job, folks. Item 4, matters not on the agenda. Any items? Item 5, motion to adjourn. Is there a motion? So moved. Mr. Keeley, second. Second. Mr. Fitzgerald, all in favor, aye? Aye. Thank you.